everyone, my name is Shauna, in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be doing my December reading wrap up for 2022, which I know is going up in 2023, and that's because at the end of every month I always try and like squeeze in some like shorter books, so I couldn't really film this early because I knew I would possibly read more last minute, which I did. I finished a book on New Year's Eve. So yeah, you're getting my December wrap up now. I read 7 books in December. I read 2 NetGalley arcs, I read 3 ebooks, 4 physical books. You know, it was a pretty successful reading month for me. The first book that I read was a book called Between Takes, and this is by C.J. Birch. This is one that I got off of NetGalley. I do want to say though, this is pitched as a romance, but the romance is like very weak, so I would classify it more as women's fiction. So Between Takes is a story about this set on a TV show, and on this set there's a lot of drama happening. There's a rumor going around that someone is sleeping with a director or a famous actor in order to get better parts. And the story takes place on the 2nd season of this show, and there is an intimacy coordinator who's just being brought on for the 2nd season. And the main actress on the show starts to catch some feelings for this intimacy coordinator. So I had mixed feelings about this book. I really liked the intimacy coordinator part of the story. I really liked the drama on set, but I wasn't a huge fan of the writing style. Like, something about C.J. Birch's writing style made it so I felt really like disconnected from the characters and really disjointed from them, and I didn't really see the chemistry there between the 2 love interests. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I found that it was like mostly enjoyable. Like, I don't regret reading it, but it felt like there was a lot lacking from this story. And then the next book I read is one that I won in a Goodreads giveaway, and this one I was a little nervous to read because of the synopsis, but it turned out to be surprisingly both better and worse than I was expecting, and I'll explain that one sec. So this is Real Easy by Mary Rutkowski. This is a thriller. This story revolves around a strip club and some people who work at the strip club. And the story first introduces some of the dancers at the strip club, and then immediately it jumps into the action. 2 members of the strip club were taken. They were kidnapped. One of them ends up being dead and being found near the site of the kidnapping. The other one is missing, and there is a bunch of different perspectives from a wide variety of different characters, and they're trying to figure out where is this missing person and who killed the other dancer. So it's better than I anticipated because I was scared to read it because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get too scared. But I didn't get too scared, and I was actually really interested in this story, which is why it's better. But it's also worse than I anticipated because Mary Rutkowski is a very famous author. She wrote The Winner's Curse, I think it is. I think maybe it's a different one. Anyway, she wrote young adult fantasy books, and I've heard really good things about her young adult stories, and so I had high expectations for this book. It was a little bit of a letdown, but it was still interesting and I was invested in the story. This is one that you really have to work to get into. There is a wide cast of characters, and all of the dancers have their normal name and a stage name that you have to keep track of. So it took a lot of work to get in, and I feel like if the cast had been cut down and there was less characters, it might make the story a little more interesting, because like I just kept getting confused and I had to like almost feel like I was studying for a test in order to keep track of everything. And I also had an issue with the fact that like a lot of gross things were put in here for shock effect. And I was like, we don't need that. I get that this is Mary Rutkowski's first like dive into adult fiction, but I'm like, adult fiction doesn't mean that you have to put the most horrific and disgusting things in there for shock effect that have no impact on the plot. But anyways, I did find this interesting and I was captivated by the story, so I ended up giving it 3 stars, but it can't be any higher than that because I had so many issues with the story as well. And then I read one of my favorite books of the year, and that is Just Might Work. This is a queer fake dating romance, and this was written by Katia Rose. I've been reading a lot of Katia Rose's books this year. Well, I read a lot of them in 2022. I'll probably continue doing that in 2023. And Just Might Work is now my favorite one of Katia Rose's novels. Just Might Work follows Dane and Evangeline, and they have been living together for a cheap rent in this house that is owned by one of Dane's relatives. But Dane's relative, she believes that she's a matchmaker, so she believes that Dane and Evangeline are meant for each other, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna let them have this cheap rent so they can fall in love. But Dane's relative all of a sudden goes, oh, you know, I'm sensing that someone else may need this house and you may have to find somewhere else to live. And Dane and Evangeline freak out because they need this low rent to stay where they are in Canada. So Dane and Evangeline come up with this plan. Their relative is a matchmaker. She wants them to be together. So they are going to start fake dating in order to make the relative be like, oh, my wish for them to be together is actually happening. I freaking loved this story. The setting of the house is so like nice and cozy. There's like an awesome library that Evangeline has in there. Dane and Evangeline have chemistry from the very start, and I love their bickering, and then I love how they go into understanding each other so much. There's non-binary representation in here because Dane is non-binary, lesbian representation, there is transgender representation, there's just tons of representation in there. It's really well done. It is spicy, so keep that in mind. Like if you aren't into spicy books, maybe this isn't the one for you, but I just love this one so much. Katia Rose is just such a phenomenal writer. And then next up is my least favorite book that I read this month, which is shocking because I freaking loved the first book in this series when I read it earlier this year. I could rant about this book for days, so I'm gonna try and like not rant about it too much, okay? So, Blood Marked by Tracy Deonn. I gave it 1 star. And I gave the first one 5 stars, and the first one is one of my favorite books of all time. So, that is saying a lot about how bad this book is. I mean, I say bad, it is subjective. I know some people do like this book. So, Legendborn is a book that involves the Knights of the Round Table, like King Arthur, and it involves Merlin, all of these different like knights, you know, and it involves like their descendants, and their descendants can get powers from the knights, and they get these powers so they can fight in a war. And it takes place at an early college, and the main character, Bree, who's right there, she also has some other parts about her that involve like her ancestors, and she has a unique way that she gets into this organization with like the descendants of the Knights of the Round Table. So the first book was really interesting and fascinating, and I really was interested in this whole knights thing. This book ends up being basically just a love triangle, but this is just developing one part of the love triangle, and the part that's developed in here is just plain cheating. And it felt like the majority of the stuff that you learn about the Knights of the Round Table and how the descendants work is not in here at all. This only involves 3 Knights of the Round Table. All the other ones are basically non-existent, except for maybe 2 pages in the book where they're mentioned. And Bree right there and Sel were pissing me off in this book. My favorite characters are barely in this book. Nick and Greer are barely in this book. And the thing about the cheating is Bree is in an established relationship with Nick that happens in the first book. So it's not that much of a spoiler, and you can sense that it's going to happen really early on in Legendborn. But Sel here acknowledges that Bree and Nick are in a relationship, but he doesn't care. And he starts like making moves on her. And I hate cheating so much. It is so unnecessary. The only time that cheating should be included is books, in my opinion, is if you're gonna make a villain seem more disgusting and revolting. That is the only time, in my opinion, there should be any cheating in books. So I hated how much cheating there was in here. And I just found myself like bored out of my mind for most of this book, and I got irritated by literally every character. So yeah, I hated this book. And I'm gonna stop ranting here because I could rant so much longer. I have a full rant on Goodreads. You should go check that out because I have a lot of thoughts on this book, and they are not good thoughts. And then the next book that I read is one that I really enjoyed, and that is Divine Rivals. This is by Rebecca Ross, and this is the first book in the Iris at the Front series. I got this one off of NetGalley, and it's pitched as young adult historical fiction fantasy, but the fantasy elements are like super light in the story, so I would say it's more like young adult historical fiction romance instead of like just take the fantasy out, you know? This follows 2 people who are rivals at this newspaper company. So they are writers, and they're fighting for this one spot. The main character, Iris, though, has some pretty terrible things happen in her life, and she ends up making some hasty life decisions that impacts the course of her life. And in the midst of Iris having all of these issues in her life, she discovered that if she writes a letter and puts it under her door to her closet, the letter disappears. But she doesn't know that the letters are disappearing and going to her rival at the newspaper company, who eventually starts writing her back, and a romance ensues from there. I thought this one was really well written and interesting. I really love the two main characters. I was rooting for them to be together from the very start. It did take a little bit of time to get into, so I'm giving it 4 stars instead of 5, but I did really enjoy this one, and I really want the sequel, and I'm gonna be so pissed off if the two main characters can't end up with each other, because they just need to end up with each other, okay? And then the next book that I read is one that's really intense, and I honestly think everyone should be required to read this book at least once in their life. And that is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Kindred is a classic book that I feel like most people know what it's about, but in case you don't, Kindred follows this girl named Dana, and Dana, well, girl, she's a woman. Dana is in the present in like the 1970s, I think it is, and all of a sudden she gets sent back to the past, where she finds a young boy who is drowning. So she goes and saves him, but then she goes back to the present eventually. And she keeps being sent back to save this boy. And this boy in the past is the son of a plantation owner, and slavery is going on. So of course, Dana is a black woman, so when she gets sent back into the past, everyone assumes that she is a slave. So it's really intense, but it is really interesting and fascinating. It is one of the best portrayals of slavery that I've ever read. It is heartbreaking, yet it is something that you can't put down, and it's something that I feel like everyone should read. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. The reason I didn't give it 5 stars is because I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions in here. Like, why is she sent back to help Rufus in particular? Why couldn't she be sent back to help any of her other ancestors? And why are the times so random that she's in the present? Like, it seems like there's no rhyme or reason for how long she stays in the present before she's sent back again. And like the ratio from like the amount of time that she's in the present to the like how many years have passed in the past when she gets sent back, that makes any sense. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, it doesn't seem like there's logic to the time travel. But anyways, I did really enjoy this one. I think everyone should read it. Just don't like analyze the time travel too hard, and I think you'll like it. And then the final book I read, and the reason why I couldn't film my December wrap-up earlier, is One Punch Man Volume 4. The story is by One, the art by Yuzuki Murata. So One Punch Man is a really fun story, and it follows Saitama, and Saitama is like overpowered. He can defeat basically any villain with one punch, and he's just sort of bored in life. He doesn't have any like strong villains to compete with, and because of that, he's constantly on the lookout for a villain that he can actually like compete with and can put up a challenge. It's a funny story because Saitama's sort of like derpy, you know, but it's a really funny story. It's really enjoyable. I really like it. This is the 4th volume, and I will be continuing the series because I like it. There is one issue with this book though. My issue with this book is that there's a gay character introduced in here. He is the first one introduced in the series, but he is the definition of the gay predator stereotype, and I get that this is supposed to be a funny book and that it's just supposed to be funny, but members of the LGBTQ+ community in real life face harassment and hatred because of this predator stereotype. So I'm like, why are you including that with the first gay character that you introduce in this series? They better have at least one more character in this series that is a part of the LGBTQ+ community that is not the definition of the gay predator stereotype, or else I'm gonna be pissed. But besides that, I really enjoyed this one, and the gay predator isn't introduced until like right here-ish. So he's not introduced until the very end. I'm hoping that it will somehow get better and not just have that stereotype for no reason. But yeah, I enjoyed this one, so I gave it 4 stars. But just keep in mind that there's one problematic element to this book, and I personally am under the belief that you can enjoy problematic books, you just should call out the problematic things in the book, you know? So yeah, those are all those 7 books that I read in the month of December in 2022. I hope all of you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me if you haven't already. I have lots of exciting videos coming out in this new year of 2023, and I hope all of you stick around to watch them. Till next time, goodbye.